yesterday, we spent the majority of time, and I gave everybody a link, or where the link is, about Scripture itself, and how, for me, I haven't found it to fail yet, that if I trust in the Bible, because I would say the Bible wins over everything, over preacher, over my own feelings, over anything I experience, over medical prognoses, yeah. For the record, prognoses. That whenever I say the Bible wins, so then if I'm following the Bible, then I'm going to win. And I don't want to be a loser. I don't count myself as a loser. I count myself as a winner. And so, and who wants to, go into a game and say, I'm going to lose? Same with life. And I think the closer we can stick to the Bible, the more we win. And honestly, we're talking also about how we're already sort of crazy to believe in this Bible anyway. I mean, we already believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, lived a perfect sinless life, died, 3 days dead, rose again, and not just Jesus, but all the miracles. I mean, here's another side note. By the way, for you new people, I use side notes just because I'm a little ADD, but I figure I'm tracking with you guys with this vibe. In and out, okay? Like Jonah and the big fish, right? That's a crazy story. It's like, yeah, really? Seriously? And I would think that way too. Until I read that Jesus himself likens his own death and resurrection to Jonah and the big fish. He says, just as Jonah was in the belly of a fish for 3 days, so is the Son of Man. And it's amazing because I've done way too much study for this, and I said yesterday as well that honestly, you guys should just do some study because it'll solidify your belief and your understanding. But even atheists know that you've got to believe this whole Bible from cover to cover. Huxley, you guys know who Thomas Huxley was? He was a famous humanist in Darwin's day. I'm just going to read what he said right here. It says, I'm fairly at a loss to comprehend how anyone for a moment can doubt that Christian theology must stand or fall with the historical trustworthiness of the Jewish Scriptures. The very conception of the Messiah or Christ is inextricably woven with Jewish history. The identification of Jesus of Nazareth with that Messiah rests upon the interpretation of the passage of the Hebrew Scriptures, which have no, I'll get to the more, or you'll understand it, no evidence of if the covenant with Abraham was not made, if circumcision and sacrifices were not ordained by Yahweh, if the 10 words were not written, he says 10 words being, the 10 Commandments, by God's hands, if all these things, if the story of the deluge is fiction, that of the fall, a legend, and that the creation of the dream of a seer, if all these definite and detailed narratives of apparently real events have no more value as history than the stories of the regal period of Rome, you guys aren't probably understanding this right now. By the way, what about the authority of the writers of the book of the New Testament, who on this theory have not merely accepted flimsy fiction for solid truth, but have built the very foundation of Christian dogma upon legendary quicksand? In other words, he's saying, if all the stuff that you guys believe in the early part of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, if that's all baloney and quicksand, you'd be fooled, and anybody would be fooled to try to build your dogma, your doctrine, your theology, and our hope all the way into eternity on quicksand. And I've been reading actually a bunch of atheists because they're convinced that they're right, of course, that God doesn't exist. And they point out the fallacy of, at one point, you stop believing it as fake and then you take it on as real. And so that's what we talked about a little bit yesterday. Not all the way that way, but some of that. And so the link is just on the salttoday.org. And then if you go to the tracks, breakout session, the tracks, and then you go to this one, right under it is a link. And I spent way too long. I didn't think it was going to take me that long because I was just compiling the creation scriptures out of the Bible. And I thought, well, this is, I know a lot of them already. And there's it's 4 pages long, 10 type. It's long. It's a lot of scripture, and we went through some of those. But that's for your resource. Please grab that, download it. I don't know how long it will be on there because I don't know how long Salt State Auto is going to exist. But that way you don't have to do the work because you'll want this. You'll want this later. You want to just continue to say, okay, because you're going to get blasted over and over again all through your studies. Who's in anything like that deals with science, biology, all that stuff? Yeah, a little bit. Like mostly English professors probably don't really deal with this that much, right? And I was a civil engineer, so we really didn't deal with it too much either because we just did numbers. So like if you're in the medical profession or anything scientific, they're going to call you and think you're an idiot. Even Bill Nye, the science guy, he went on public, like he had made a huge announcement, it was like 5 minutes long, basically saying, parents, if you're raising your kids believing in the Bible and believing in creation, you are doing a disservice to your kids and to society. You're teaching them, you're handicapping them from succeeding in the real world. I mean, for 5 minutes. And so I was like, dude, I don't know where Bill Nye the science guy stands. So here's an interesting thing. He's going to be debating Ken Ham, who is a big creationist believer. I mean, he started Answers in Genesis, the Creation Museum in Kentucky, which I've gone lots of times. They're going to debate each other in February. So if you look that up, that might be something worthwhile to check out. Because rarely, Ryan and I were talking, rarely do you really actually have head-on debates. It's more just straw man, tear that down. Well, yeah, well, I can build this straw man, tear that down. Straw man arguments, have you heard that before? It's basically, I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to make my own interpretation of what you're saying. It's not really what you're saying. It's just close enough, and I'm going to build one so that I can say, and this is how you're wrong. And you feel like, oh, I was just wrong. It's like, no, they built something, even if you weren't arguing, just so that they could show I can say this thing. That's what a straw man argument is. Okay, so today I want to look at extra biblical examples of these things outside of the Bible, because here's the biggest deal. We talk about evolution, and the word itself is so nebulous in evolution, where you can evolve like societies evolve. Okay, so we use it in that term, in that sense. So that's information, that's culture, so it's changing. So we sometimes say evolution has changed. But the evolution of from 14.5 billion years all up to now, it's not just changing, it needs new information. And that is the key. Evolution requires new information. And not just mutations, because that's what's said a lot of times in science, is mutations. Well, you need something first to mutate. Right? And so if I'm made up of 4 letters, A, B, C, D, no matter how many times you mutate me, you're not going to get an F, G, H, I, J, K. You'll get maybe A, C, D, B, or A, F, or A, B, anything, but you're never going to get new information. And the level of information from a single-celled organism to us is crazy big. It's just one of those 10 to the 40th or 400th, or, you know what I mean? So that is the big difference between, I mentioned yesterday, goo to you. From goo, because that's what we have to believe, that this is an evolutionary process. At one point, your great ancestors, Esther, was goo. In between that, it was crawling out and losing legs and and so that's a huge thought that we've got to remember. That's the number one thing that you have to remember. And as well, as evolutionary process is a brainless process. In other words, nothing's directing evolution. And so it's amazing how many times, I mean, I've read way too much about this stuff. And they personify evolution as in God. You know, that evolution would hold on to this, and evolution would discard this, and evolution would keep these around, like pre-adaptation we're going to talk about later on. But evolution isn't a goal-driven thing. The goal of evolution is nothing. There is no goal of evolution. And so those two concepts really help us break down, okay, well, what's the deal with the creation argument? God made things ex nihilo out of nothing. So it was nothing to everything. And the real fastest example, let's take dogs for example. There's how many breeds of dogs? How many kinds of dogs? No idea. Tons and tons and tons. but they all are dogs, and they can interbreed. They can they can make other dogs, and you get Wiener Schnitzel Schnauzers, and you get, Boxer Briefs, or no. You get all these different kinds of dogs, but they're still dogs. And so God made a dog kind. Do we still have that dog kind? Probably not. It's probably been filtered out. Because just like us, if you notice, I don't know how much you guys pay attention, but the human body is breaking down. And we are not nearly as healthy as people were farther back. Our medicine is helping us and fixing us up. But it's amazing how my wife was really not jumping on let's just medicate ourselves. She's trying to figure out what else can we do instead, and it's nutrients and it's all this stuff. And so we're on a big kick on that, but we're realizing this isn't new stuff. People used to be healthy not by medicine but by nutrients before medicine was available. And we just keep nutrients. We keep medicating now where we used to nutrient. And our bodies are breaking down. Everything's breaking down. So whole second law of thermodynamics that was talked about actually twice, right? H.L. mentioned it, but also James Bradford just mentioned it a little bit. So if you take that dog kind, it has all the information it needs, and then eventually it boils down. It just slices off depending on short-haired, long-haired, middle-haired dogs, and the long-haired dogs, they go off into a hot climate along with everybody else, and the long-haired dogs die, they overheat, they die. So now their genes, their information is dead, gone, buried. But the short-haired genes keep proliferating. That's why you see, not just in dogs, but in every type of animal or people, that we all start to look very similar depending on our climate and location. What's changed a little bit for us is the ability to travel and the ability to intermingle and intermarry and all that stuff. And so that's what's getting the mix actually back to healthy. Because that's the whole rule. You're not supposed to marry, up to your second cousin? Is that the rule? Anybody know that? Come on, Kentucky, you know that.
Oh, man.
Oh, dude, I got it. Just because the breakdown in your genes, the whole goal is that you would marry, and then your kids would have the breakdown in yours, but your spouse would have correct, and so it would bridge over and you'd be okay. You both have that breakdown. You have a hole, and that's where you get a lot of these different diseases. Well, as we are intermixing and intermarrying, that's actually bringing us healthier because we have certain breakdown. Way off topic, sorry about that. So the requirement is creation. God created everything, and then it's been trickling down, but it's still within its time, and that's what the Bible tells us, made them in their time. Evolution requires nothing, and then additional information. That is the key understanding, is additional information. We've never and have never and will never find additional information. It's not going to keep growing and growing and growing. We're not finding that happen, whatever the case. And so here's a couple things, and I'm not sure how much he has talked about this over there. I mentioned irreducible complexity. By the way, we're talking for about an hour and a half total, and this will be also question and answer. So we want to do that too. So we're smushing 2 into 1. This means I'm throwing out a lot. Like we can't cover it all. And there's so much good stuff. And so I'm hoping that you guys just in general are learners and want to just discover it. And don't just take what your biology teachers is fact. Like they mentioned a couple times, the whole gay gene. Well, those of us that study this, we've known that for a while. But it doesn't get out into the public very much because the public, aka the devil, I'm not calling the public devil, but that they're not, well, let me say it this way, the media is not trying everything they can to help you have a relationship with Jesus. By any means. And so why in the world would you get stuff from the media or from the world, hey, look for Jesus, look for God, find forgiveness, find redemption for the cause. And so you got to be a learner, you got to look for it and this thing. So next thing, we're going to do a couple different things. Irreducible complexity, you got to remember that. Irreducible, so it can't be reduced. Complexity, complex. And the best thing for me, example, is the mousetrap. The mousetrap, this mousetrap right here, there are certain necessary parts for it. If you take one thing out of it, it won't work. Okay? So the mousetrap's made up of like a hammer. It's the thing that comes down and bam, kills the mouse. Katie, you okay with it?
Yeah, that I just had
Sats
an
and nuts.
experience from restaurant food.
Oh, bad experience. Can you give her a hug? You got a hammer, a catch, a spring, a platform, and a holding bar. You could even say you also have those little staples that hold it all together, because even if you don't have one of those staples, it won't work. If you take any one of those things out, it's no longer going to pass the mouse. It's not going to work. So that's the fastest understanding for you of what irreducible complexity is. So it's amazing, because I mentioned this a little bit yesterday. It really does depend on where you start in the stance of if there's a God or if there's not a God. Because there were people saying, oh, that argument was thrown out. It was in 1989, they wrote stuff, and then I read them the counter-argument to that argument, because evolutionists now would say, well, there's also pre-adaptation. Because evolution says the hammer existed, and then along came the spring, and then along came the platform, and then along came this, and just by random chance in millions of years, and honestly, chances against them, not for them, eventually it assembled and it could make, and I know I'm talking about this mousetrap, but all those other lists we could say, flagellum, the pneumai, tears, knee joints, there's tons of irreducible, complex things that we talk about. And I just spent way too much time studying all this, but we could keep going. They say evolution continues just to eventually throw itself together and it'll work, and that's how you can get it. And they have an example of the eye, but it goes back farther and farther into just a light source and sensitive to light and all this stuff. And so they're saying evolution does pre-adaptation. I'm going to try reading this, and we'll see if it'll make sense to you. It makes sense more often when you can just read it for yourself than verbal, so hopefully we'll try. So here's a Wired Science, Brandon Klein, he puts it this way. The necessary pieces for one particular cellular machine were lying around long ago. It was simply a matter of time before they came together into a more complex unity. He also states, this is his argument for pre-adaptation, which is the argument against irreducible complexity. The process by which parts accumulate until they're ready to snap together is called pre-adaptation. It's a form of mutual evolution in which the buildup of parts provides no immediate advantage or disadvantage. Mutual evolution falls outside of the description of Charles Darwin, but once the pieces gather, mutation and natural selection can take care of the rest. It's just simple like that. The problem with this concept is, why would evolution keep parts that are intermediate between their old function and the new function? The idea, the concept of evolution is it only evolves if it's beneficial. So even if there's mutual evolution, it won't evolve, it won't go forward, it won't keep it. And so the parts or proteins is, when we're talking cellular level, the proteins are more or less stuck between a rock and a hard place. They likely don't perform their old function because they've been altered by mutation, and they don't perform their new function in a molecular machine because not all the parts are present yet. Studies have shown that bacteria tend to lose genetic information that is not needed in their current environment. And that's key, because you'll hear like antibiotics are becoming more and more immune. And so you'll hear they're evolving. What they're doing is they're devolving. In other words, they used to, actually I just learned last time I was talking to a guy about malaria. So I'll bring it right today. And he's a missionary that dealt with it. And I was just like, what's the deal? Because he was talking about how bad malaria is, and completely right off the bat. And I'm like, what's the deal? Because we just adopted a boy, and they talk about malaria like it's the cold, and catch it and not. And he said, well, originally what's going on inside of you is red blood cells, and malaria just basically eats your red blood cells and lets you die. But there's sickle cells that replace the red blood cells in a lot of Africans. And if you have too much sickle cells, then you have sickle cell anemia. But if you have some sickle cells and some red cells, malaria can't eat the sickle cells. And so it's actually a loss of information. It's not just red, it's now sickle cells that are being fought against. And so these people are immune. All the way, let's do antibiotics. Antibiotics used to react like could kill something in your body, or kill something, a disease or something, some problem, some cold, let's say the common cold or whatever. Well, now the common cold doesn't have that plug. That plug's now erased. And so it's like, does that evolve or devolve? It's devolved because it's not available anymore. It's been lost. And so all these things are a loss of information, and they don't react. They don't respond. Trying to put this, do you guys understand? If you need to make another example. Okay, good. It's like, I used to be able to punch you in the stomach, but eventually you don't have a stomach, so I can't punch you there. Okay, is that a fast enough way to say it? All right. So have you evolved? No, you devolved. You're one less stomach. Okay, so I wonder if I have a picture. You guys heard of this? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time because it really is tricky, but this is now a real life example, not just a mousetrap. But these things are amazing. This also falls in, we're going to do tomorrow about just how awesome creation is. And we talked about that. When you recognize the Creator, then you can give Him glory. You say, you got to be kidding God. That is an awesome little thing that goes on, it attaches, it's a corkscrew, the flagellum is a corkscrew-shaped hair-like appendage attached to the cell surface, which acts like a propeller, allowing the bacterium to swim. So it's going towards food. So it swims like this. There's another thing that sort of flaps, but this one swims. It's attached and is rotated by a tiny electrical motor made of different kinds of proteins. And like the mousetrap, it has different required things. There's a drive shaft, a universal joint, an L and a P ring, and some other rings, and a C ring and a stud. And so if you're missing one of those things, it won't work. Irreducible complexity says that the structure is so complex that all its necessary parts must initially be present in a suitably functioning fashion. That's what I mean by irreducible complexity. That's what's meant by that. So this flagellum requires over 40 different proteins to act and be present and be working at the exact same time to work. If it doesn't, then the bacteria doesn't move, and then certain bacteria die because they can't get anywhere they think they can. Here's the cool thing. Some bacteria cells have one, and it just like drives around like a motorboat. Some have two, and it like goes different directions and kicks this one and kicks it. I mean, these are teeny little things. It's amazing. God made these stupid little nothings with motorboats. And some bacteria have one, some have two. Others, a third group of the bacteria has them surrounding the whole cell. These flagellum wrap themselves together in a helical bundle at the end of the cell and rotate in unison. So not only are they just driving, they're working together. How do they talk together? I mean, there's not a brain in these things, but somehow there's not a brain inside this bacteria to tell. I don't know. And so as I study more creation, I'm like, God, that's awesome. When it says in the Bible that He holds all things together, that without Him, if He zooms, if He's gone, everything just stops to the cellular level. People don't just die, cells die, everything dies. Everything stops. If the cell wants to change direction, the flagellum unwrap themselves, move to the opposite end of the cell, reform the bundle, and again rotate in a coordinated fashion. So they disassemble themselves, like a motor disassembling itself. I mean, I'm sure some of you guys have junk cars that do that as well. But they don't then reassemble themselves to work. They disassemble, move to the other side, reassemble, and keep on going. That, to me, attests to the work of a master engineer. We can't do that. We can't design something like that. So the flagellum is an example. The eye has been used multiple times. Of an irreducible complexity, and I looked into that, and that's when most of the arguments would say, well, no, it was progressively more and more and more, and people use Corvettes as an example. And the main argument, again, is what increased information, but also that it's a goal dispatch. Corvette makers like, well, this Corvette looks like, this Corvette looks like, and that's how we evolved the Corvette. Well, yeah, but there was designers, there was marketing, there was engineers, there was all these different things. And God is our great designer. Yeah, I guess my whole hope for this track is to stir hunger. Because there's so much information, there's so much out there. It's just amazing, it's beautiful. We talked before, at the end of last time, that you might have questions, and we'll talk more about other stuff. I mean, you seem like the divergent thing, the divergent 1%, we can talk about that later. But what are some questions that you might have had, or you might have thought of something, and you had some aha moments, or maybe you were majorly studious and you looked up some more of those scripture verses, and you thought, that was really cool. I didn't get a chance to share it with my other group yesterday. Do we have any of those? Because I don't want to just talk, especially because you've been in session after session, and we're going to push all the way into 115. So, does anyone have something that you like? What's the deal with this? And you mentioned this yesterday. No? Okay. I'm boring you, I'm going over your head, and you're super polite. Let me encourage you at least, at some point, like the knee joint is another perfect example. There's 16 critical characteristics that need to happen for the knee to work. A simple knee. Which I didn't know this until I started learning, because I just love learning. The knee joint is actually the trickiest joint in the body, versus even a shoulder joint. I was like, really? My shoulder can do this, you know, but you don't want to go like this, that's it. But there's so many things that need to be present, 16 different characteristics, all at one time for just a simple knee joint. And yet I take that for granted. Tears are another thing that are just phenomenal. They're not simple, they're complex creations of water, mucus, oils, electrolytes. They also have some protective bacteria-fighting substances to help so that we don't get infections. And it's amazing how the more anyone, scientists or not, studies the makeup and composition of anything, you're like, oh, this is really tricky. It's not just water. And it's not just even those elements thrown in. It's at a certain percentage. And one has to be there first before the next one can work. And you probably talked a little bit about that over there, of just being so specific, how specific it needs to be for it even to function. I mean, I'm not a car person. Anyone a car person, you can work on cars, engines. Those things, I mean, I can put all the parts inside the hood. It doesn't mean they're going to work. I can go to AutoZone and buy them all and just, all right, got it. All the parts are there. Well, an evolutionary thought, first of all, says somehow they end up in there. And somehow they end up putting themselves together and actually working. And a car part, an engine, is super simple compared to even the most simple of organisms. I personally believe that if Darwin, who didn't quite start this, he actually took his lead from the person in front of him, his mentor, but he popularized it, and it's like, wow. I think if he would be able to see now, because we can go so much more in depth into what these things are, even DNA coding, this is a gigantic thing when we figured out the DNA code. I don't think he would have said anything of the like. He'd be like, no, I'm totally wrong. And he actually, I might have a quote somewhere, saying basically, if you guys see the, going, where is that? I don't know if I'm going over this scatterbrain. It's just there's so much stuff. It's like it's hard. I was struggling in the home trying to figure out how do I arrange all this because it's so in depth. This whole thing is about all these different evolutionists saying, well, it won't make sense if you believe in evolution, then you can't believe. It's really hard to believe in Christianity and Jesus and the history of Jesus. If Adam, same Huxley, if Adam may be held to no more real a person than Prometheus, and if the story of the fall is merely an instructive type, like just a teaching lesson, comparable to the profound Promethean mythos, then what value has Paul's dialect of Jesus and our necessity for him? So mentioning Darwin, like I did, he said, as soon as I can see things, because he knew his limitation, and be able to see deeply, he's like, I'm sure that it'll be proved right or wrong.
Yeah, I think the quote I remember, he was in his own writings, in his own journals, he said that over the next 100 years, my theory will either be confirmed or destroyed based on the tertiary evidence in the next 100 years. Finding these transition fossils for creatures going from one stage to the next. If they don't exist, my theory is false, categorically false. But if they do exist, then it will be confirmed. And so that was his prediction. We have not found the evidence, and still that's something that's swept under the rug by Darwinian evolutionists.
Yeah. And again, it depends on where you start.
Yeah.
What your starting point is. I'll jump off of that with the whole DNA thing. Because DNA, 0.1% divergence. And I'm reminded of another thing. Let me tell you the other thing first. Orphan genes. Right? That's another thing that I was going to put in that extra dot. I just forgot. Orphan genes, basically, they thought the more they get to study all the different genetic makeups of everything, they would realize that they all they're all mutations of each other. And so they become close enough, and so we just need to know more information. We just need to find more genes. And then this gene, and that's just like basically taking 6 decks of cards and throwing them in there, and we're just missing another deck. Okay, now this matches. This funky one matches this funky one. Okay, good. This one matches, this one matches. So they thought, we just need more decks. And then they'll start to all match. They'll start to all line up together. As they continue to go through each animal or each anything and write out their genetic code, they're realizing that no, it's not that way. They're finding that they're going away from, there's more orphan genes. There's nothing that matches. This one is still single. This one is still single. And they thought, no, they'll eventually all match up and line up because we all came from this one sense out this way, like the evolutionary tree. So they must be able to boil it down in that genetic aspect. And so that's what's called orphan genes. That's something you can look into. It was fascinating. That's a new thing that I learned. Okay. On the flip side, when you're in kind, which this is what the whole DNA 0.1% divergence within people, we'll just talk about people because people can procreate with people, so we're one kind. There's 0.1% divergence in our genes, in our DNA makeup. Dr. Purdom, who said, the genetic evidence is consistent with human DNA being young and the human race beginning with a very small starting population. The Bible tells us 2 people. The International HatMat Project endeavors to study a select group of DNA similarities or differences between humans, known as SMP, single nucleotide polymorphism. I try not letting words get in the way of stuff in front of my normal jumble through them. But the SMPs are believed to be representative of the genome of total human DNA, such that what is true for them would most likely be true for the whole genome. These studies and others have shown that the difference in DNA between any two humans is amazingly low. Only 0.1%. Any two, that's awesome. Which is very different than what evolution would say. And a minor side note, evolution is the father of racism. Which is so weird because now us Christians who believe that God created us in His image, male and female, we're the opposite of that. We believe that everybody, no matter how small or big or about, that everyone's equal and God loves everybody. There were, before science was majorly, how can I say this, a god in our society, before science turned into a god, there were scientists who would go and they'd get aborigines, thinking that they were closer to the evolutionary ancestors, and they would be tested, just inhumane tests. They're people, but it was all in the name of science. Any two humans, isn't that amazing? Reflecting on this very low percentage, some scientists said this proportion is low compared with those of many other species, from fruit flies to chimpanzees, reflecting the recent origins of our species from a small founding population. They also stated, certain genetic estimates tell us that humans vary only slightly at the DNA level, and that only a small proportion of this variation separates continental populations. So I guess they're just repeating everything he said. Here's another cool part of that. And then we're off of this. Furthermore, many places in which the human genome varies at 0.1%, the reason because we're a ton. What did Dr. Bradford say? How many trillion cells?
60 trillion cells in the human body or something.
And then how many, what would the DNA code for a single cell be? Yeah. And so if we're talking 0.1%,
Right.
that's still gonna be a huge number, but it's still 0.1%. And so here's the cool thing. Furthermore, many places in which the human genome does vary occurs in only 2 versions. This is quite consistent with the biblical truth that our founding population consisted of 2 people. I thought, oh, that's cool. So even the divergence they're finding is in 2 areas. Which makes sense. If the Bible's true. I don't believe it personally. Furthermore, other genetic variants occur in versions restricted to specific populations, and this finding is consistent with the biblically documented dispersion from the Tower of Babel, resulting from isolations of some groups from the rest of the human population. In other words, and even closer divergence, so less than 0.1, so 0.05, whatever, happens because they're continental. Like if we just took this continent and looked at the genetic makeup, there'd be that much less difference. So the max you're going to get, go to China, and go to Antarctica, go to Alaska, you get 0.1%. But if you stay in China, you're going to get pretty close to the same thing. Amazing. Okay, now anyone have thoughts? Looks like you studied some of this stuff before.
A little bit, just picking up tidbits from these sessions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How would you minister to someone who believes in evolution? Like, what would be like your number 1 argument? Like, I mean, I know we've been talking about arguments, but like, what do you think they would throw at us? Like, what the number 1 thing?
Before I answer, what would someone else?
I recently talked about, were you asking like how to answer that question?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I recently talked to my biology professor about evolution and stuff, and like my number 1 thing that I said to him was like, it was pretty much what he says, like the knee joints and like animals that kind of defy evolution. And I think the main argument that we need to get to with a biology professor is what I did is I just talked to Jesus, talking about Jesus, because they're not going to listen to what we have to say about evolution because they know more than we do. So I think we need to stick on Jesus and then get them to believe about Jesus before we can talk about evolution, because you're not going to get anywhere with them but talking about evolution. Is that so?
Yeah. And one thing that I've run into as well is when speaking with people, especially only scientific people on these issues, and especially if you're not real well versed in science or these types of conversations, they try and inflame the ridiculousness of what Christianity claims. And so you really believe that all of the animals on the earth fit onto a boat, right? You really believe that all of the human race came from 2 people? Are you saying that Cain had to marry his sister? These types of things, they bring up these things to try and point out absurdities. And one of the things that you have to remember is that it does come back to, and that's what I really appreciate about what you've been saying over and over again, is that it comes back to what is your starting frame of reference. And one of the things, the illustrations I use is that in mathematics, you study geometry, and in mathematics, there are different branches of geometry, and depending upon what your starting assumptions are, you will end up in different places, geometry-wise. Same thing applies here. Whatever your starting assumptions are as far as the existence or non-existence of God, that's what you end up. And so I'm not an idiot for believing what I believe. If God really does exist, then all of these things are possible. And so you're not necessarily going to, I don't think you're necessarily going to convince them that evolution is false and that the biblical worldview is true. But what I try and do is cast a little shadow on that. Try and break that arrogance that they have, that I'm smarter than you, you believe with those things. And just say, hey, listen, it's reasonable if God exists. It's reasonable if Jesus really is. You look back at what God is.
And I would, like I said at the very beginning, is evolution requires an increase in information. That's the easy thing, that you don't need to know everything. They haven't found anything that starts with ABCD and comes up adding GHI.
That's a great illustration.
That's the simple, it's the simplest. I mean, arguing is one thing, but you can always ask them, I found that works the best anyway. Say, well, one thing that I've heard, or that I have a difficulty with, is where's the increase in information? How do we get from one level of complexity to the next? Do you know? So you're not really arguing, you're asking them a question, but you can ask them in the right direction. That's exactly it.
Actually, one of the questions that I did ask him was, like, where did DNA come from? And he really got stumped on that question. He really didn't know how to answer it. His answer was like, our RNA got jumbled together and created something, but he really got stumbled, like he stumbled over it. And it's just, what you were saying is true, they don't know where that information came from. They don't know where the DNA even came from.
That's another argument.
That's a great argument.
Which, you want to say on that? I'm good there. Well, maybe it's still on my Facebook page, I'm not sure, but as I was doing research for this, it's amazing because I learned a lot from atheists fighting against people that are trying to swallow both pills. That evolution is true and Christian is true. Because the evolutionists and atheists see the fallacy. So there's a leading Dawkins, who did I talk to just the other day? Dawkins, which one is it?
Dawkins. Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins.
Hawkins is the guy
Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking is in a wheelchair.
Yes.
That changes everything.
Yes. He's also brilliant. Well, actually, he is brilliant. Dawkins is a fool. And he's just really good at marketing.
He's got a great
Stephen
PR
Hawking
guy.
is an astrophysicist.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he argues more from the anthropic principle stuff, the big picture, macroscopic, looking at universe stuff. Dawkins is a evolutionary biologist.
Okay.
But
Richard Dawkins.
Dawkins.
Dawkins was talking to a Christian, and this is still answering some of your questions of the whole human spirit. Dawkins said, well, then if God used evolution in the mix, then at what point did the Son have a spirit and the Father and the Mother did not? At what point did God breathe his life? At what point did he make him in his image? Where's the break point? Where the Son could be eternal, which is what Christianity believes, and saved and all that stuff. And the parents were souls, were spirits. What are some other things you guys done next week?
I've just run into, kind of like what Bryce was saying, just with my dad especially, because he claims atheism, he's very intellectual, and so he, like Bryce said, just makes fun. How can you be so ignorant? Really just tries to be very inflammatory, and so I don't try to argue science with him. Like, I really enjoy learning it. It builds my faith. But with someone like that who's trying just to be argumentative and my dad's not really trying to get to the truth with me. He's just trying to bother me. I really try to stay just to the heart of the matter. That God is real, He loves you. I know that you know that in your heart. And I don't try to say, well, it's true because of this evolutionary theory that's been proved wrong or anything like that. I think maybe with some students I could do that really did have a heart to know. But I just try to have discernment. Is this person really asking questions because they really want to know to build their faith? Or are they just trying to argue? And if they're just trying to argue, I just try to keep my peace and say, this is just what I believe. God has done miracles in my life. I believe Jesus is real. I respect if you don't.
and we can just agree or disagree. Because I can't just argue math and science with somebody that doesn't really want to receive information from me.
I've found that most people are just spouting talking points that they've heard before.
Yeah.
They don't know.
They don't even know.
I mean, even at the professor level, if you really push somebody, a lot of times they don't even know.
Yeah.
They're just saying what they heard somebody say is wrong with Christianity before.
Yeah.
And so I don't even want to argue, because if I do, I know more than they do. Especially on the street, if I'm not talking to a professor and somebody's like, well, Christianity's dumb. I believe in science. You'll hear that 1,000 times if you talk to people in Europe. That, I believe science. And so I found the easiest thing to do in Europe is to just always draw it back to, well, who was Jesus? Who do you think Jesus was? Because if I push them on the evolution issue, they're not going to know even what we're talking about in this room. They're clueless. They're going to spout talking points like Bryce said to try to make me angry. But they can't answer a simple question, well, who was Jesus? And so if I go, and that's the route C.S. Lewis took too, and he's way more brilliant than I am. And C.S. Lewis always drew it back to, well, who was Jesus? Because that is reducible. That's the last question. You can talk about politics or science or religion or how many people have been killed in the name of Christianity. There are all these rabbit trails that they'll try to get you to go down. But if you always end at, well, who was Jesus? And then some of the fascinating things that you just had up there are just illustrations of that's who Jesus is.
Yeah.
You can talk about all those things and say, science can't explain any of those things. My viewpoint, my worldview, explains all of those things. Your worldview, you keep saying you believe science. Science is clueless. They don't have a clue what they're talking about.
Well, it's funny because James Bradford said that Einstein was possibly the most, or no, was it H.L.? One of those guys said that Einstein was like, I disagree, I think Jesus was. He knows, he made it all.
Yeah.
So, but here's the encouraging thing, is there are answers that, like every single one of those questions that are spouted off, and if they're just spouting to raise your blood pressure, then be wise of that. But I usually say, well, do you really want me to answer that? Are you really interested?
Right.
Yeah,
Because
that's good.
the cool thing is, people have been attacking the Bible since it was pen. They're not just trying to get rid of it off the face of the earth, but poke holes in it. It's still holy. It's still totally fine, perfect. And so any rabbit trail that you want to go down, there's
answers for it.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's why I'm built up more and more in my faith, because I know that I will never dig all the way through and then pop up this side. Oops, this is false. And so my faith is really built up.
They're never going to get you.
There is an
Where you're like,
answer to
I
that.
had never
Animals
thought of
really
that.
are. That's a simple answer. There's a real simple answer for Cain and his wife. Real simple answer. And that, but it's just like a ad hominem, I heard this argument, so I'm just going to throw it out there. And we know that arguments aren't going to work, but to get someone into the kingdom or not, boy, I love learning from my own.
Yeah.
That was God. And that's God.
How did all the animals die?
What?
How did all the animals die?
Well, first of all, not all of them did.
Okay. I just thought that was a great question, and I don't know the answer.
Well, here's the deal. They figured out because of the whole dog hunt. So you don't need a boxer,
Right.
a Wiener Schnitzel, a poodle. You know what I mean? You just need two.
Yeah.
Because they have the genetic makeup to make lunch. Just like we have the genetic, Liz and I, we're married,
Right.
we can make tons of babies if her body can handle it. And none of them would look alike.
Right.
Yeah.
With
By
0.1% divergence between all of them.
And
And
they
they would all
still
look totally different.
And we don't all look different, but just the two of us.
Yeah.
And there have been multiple. Now, if you just type in Google, like white mom, white dad give birth to black kid, there are, because there's recessive genes in their makeup, that this recessive gene came together with the mom's recessive gene, and they had a black boy. And so, and that's just us way down, watered down version, because I'm lacking tons of genetic information that that my brothers and sisters in Christ from SIU and, Kudzai. I mean, Kudzai has genetic information that I don't have
Yeah.
between us, but so we can make a ton of different babies, totally different looking, just the two of us, let alone if I married someone from Africa. All those genetic genes come back in with my white genes. And so the animals, you need like a dog kind, a cat kind, an elephant kind. You didn't bring
Like full size.
this full-size adults. You can put a kitty and a puppy in the pen and they're fine. Right? They don't care. You can't put, a big dog and a big cat because they'll fight. One will end up dead. The dog will end up dead. So the fascinating is they've studied and they're guesstimating there were 2,000 total. 2,000 total on the ark. All those pictures of the giraffe sticking. There's barely any room in here. That's doing us a disservice.
Yeah.
His boat, and this is now stuff I've studied that I've lost some of the exactness of information. So you have to verify this, but the size of boat that he made wasn't duplicated until like the 1800s. So it was not a small boat. And so that's one big issue. Another one is the number of animals that we needed. Another one was the size and age of the animals. It's much easier to feed a baby elephant, two of them, than a adult elephant. And the refuse is also much easier. And it's really fascinating because also they have constructs to make it so that they didn't have to clean the poop up every day in the elephant pit. They have ways now that they do it in zoos, especially in zoos where land is a premium, like China or Japan, where the elephants stay on crates and it goes and there's a conveyor belt or just gets whisked out or washed out or So, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say earlier, in reference to talking to people, one of the most liberating things that I heard as a Christian coming in to the faith and being somewhat scientifically inclined was a quote by C.S. Lewis, and it was just corroborated in several ways. The quote, it's going to be a little out of context, but it's from The Abolition of Man, and he says, where they expected the work of expert grammarians, they got the work of amateur philosophers. And he's basically talking about these men who wrote an English book, and they ended up espousing philosophy rather than grammar. And that's what professors do a lot of times. He's an expert in biology, but he's going to espouse his philosophy to you in class. He's not a philosopher. In fact, there's a good possibility that you are better trained in philosophy than he is. He's a biologist. He's got you on biology. He does not have you on theology. And so recognizing that the expertise that they have studied for does not make them an expert in all areas, and it definitely doesn't make them an expert in theology. And that you can stand up and you can talk to people intelligently. You don't need to get into an argument. You can ask intelligent questions and not feel intimidated because you're on equal footing, even if the guy's a PhD, as long as you're talking about something that you're both around the same knowledge of. So it was one of the most liberating things as far as my study and not being intimidated by people.
I read something really interesting lately because I've always kind of felt like intelligent design versus evolution was kind of a losing battle, and Christians were on the losing side of things, and it was like we always just had to push and try. But I read an article recently that was signed off on by, I want to say 250 experts in science that said basically we all agree that there's not enough information for evolution. We believe in some kind of intelligent design. And more people are adding their signatures to that journal piece all the time. It was really fascinating to me. And these aren't just Christians saying we believe in creation, but they're scientists saying we don't know what happened, but there's enough information now, like what Steve presented yesterday, there's enough information now to to say that this whole thing was intelligently designed. Now, some of them would say we were intelligently designed by aliens. Others would say there's a higher power of some kind. Others would say Allah did it. But all of these scientists who are experts in their field say we're lining up even more with the Christians. And it was really helpful for me because I've always kind of felt like creationism versus evolution is kind of like a losing battle, and everybody wants to be on the winning side of things. But it was really encouraging to read this paper that was published in the Scientific, it may have even been Scientific American, but it was published in this peer-reviewed scientific journal saying we all agree that this whole thing came about intelligently, that evolution just doesn't have enough feet to stand on anymore.
What else I want to point out? You were talking about kinds, and I recently read something about kinds, and the fact that the scientific method, it needs something observable. And Darwin said if you can't observe it, then it's not credible. And we haven't seen a change of kind, like a change in species. Like not necessarily a change in species, but like a change in kinds is the way that the book put it. Whereas, dogs can still mate with other dogs. They're not changing species. They're not seeing that.
Dog can't mate with cat.
Right, but
And making new species.
right, which is
Right.
the changing kinds, and that's what
They're
Darwin
stuck
talked
in their
about.
kind.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not finding anything going outside of it.
And that's like a big thing, with evolution is they change kinds, throughout throughout time.
It has to. It has to. And I mentioned yesterday that, and this is more along the lines of, did God do this? And can we believe it from the very first verse of He created this day, one day He would do. Evolution requires death for success. That's not our God. God designed us for life and life to the fullest in everything. And there's questions, okay, well, could have Adam stepped on the bug? And then I'll tell you the fast answer is the bug doesn't have what the Bible calls as life. The Hebrew word, I would have if I was just taught, but there's a word that the Hebrew, what is it? Zoa?
Zoe, Z-O-E.
Yeah, it's not ringing, it might be, that's not ringing in. One of my bells, but basically a life is like, a bug doesn't have that same life, that same breathing in, understanding life, like a dolphin does, or an animal does, or a person does. And so that's a huge argument of would God have made it through death upon death upon death and say it is good, and that is good. That's the opposite of what was going on. Another point I wanted to make was this whole, well, I believe in science. I believe in science too, 100%. I've seen it this way. Science started because of Christians. And so the difference is, am I talking science like current science, or am I talking historical science? And that's a gigantic distinction, because historical science basically says, here's what we can do now, that's current science, and I'm going to put it backwards and make it applicable all the way to the beginning. So if the Grand Canyon, this might be the best example, the Grand Canyon is the beginning of, how do I say this better? They say that it can't be observable, and so they blast Christians on, well, you can't observe this, you can't observe the Spirit. But then all their historical science, you can't observe, you can't duplicate, you can replicate. But they put that into the same, this is accurate, this is concept true, just like the ones that require hypothesis and duplicable testing methods, modules, all that stuff. And so that's another thing, where am I starting my stance? Here's another thing that we run into. I'm just writing down as you guys are talking this, I appreciate this, because you guys have things that I wouldn't think of that I wouldn't hear. The alien thing. That just pushes it back one step. Okay, fine. Aliens made us. Who made them? I'll go with you. Aliens made us. I think it was one. God. It was an alien, but he made. But, so that just pushes it back.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I have a question on that. Okay, so what if you get the who made God?
And that was addressed a little bit of the uncaused cause. No, he's already been. Because if he was made, then whatever made him is now God. Which is funny because people have an issue with that. Well, where did God come from? Nowhere, he's always been. So they have an issue with that, but they don't have an issue of nothing exploded.
Right.
Into everything.
Right.
Would you rather have a being that has always been,
Right.
with perfect love, perfect justice, perfect everything, has always been, or nothing exploded into everything?
Yeah.
And point one of a millisecond is now 5 light years away. I mean, what? So that's a good thought, at least cast them back. If that was a question, whatever happened, how did God come up? Who made God? Where did the Big Bang? Where did the Big Bang come from? What banged the Big Bang? As society goes away farther and farther from Christianity, more often you will get denigrated versus talked with. And our goal, you don't need to lose your footing because there are answers everywhere. And I love it. And I learned recently about a leaf and grass. I mentioned that this. I just got totally geeked out because it's amazing what goes on in photosynthesis and chlorophyll and all that stuff. And they teach us the wrong age. They teach us when we don't give a rip.
Yeah, that's right.
Somehow we do school like when we're 25 and we're like, that's really cool. But as society goes farther and farther away from the Bible, they'll push you into a box of, I can't believe you believe that stuff. And they'll denigrate what you believe in blunt in Jesus. And honestly, if I'm going to talk with someone or not, I'll talk about Jesus all day long. I won't argue about Jesus and truth. There are arguments. I'm totally fine with that. And I've forgotten more than you may have learned in this area. But I know that it's still out there. I know that I can learn it. I'm going to go relearn it. But we've got to be sure, and that's why this whole thing keeps coming back to the Bible. That's what you got to figure out. Do I trust the Bible? And that's a whole other lesson that we're not talking about. You've got to believe in the validity of the Bible. And science makes discovery after discovery as it uses and utilizes the Bible. That's another way that I trust in the Bible. Because they look at the Bible and they make discoveries because the Bible says this. And some fool believed it, and so they go look for it, and sure enough, it's true. Through science, through astronomy. I mean, they keep learning things because the Bible says it, and if it says it, it must be right. Which is so encouraging. What else? Someone else?
Can you also explain how pain is after intricacies?
Someone else do that, Paul. So, you can't take it.
I don't know the clue.
Really?
Can I take stab?
Yeah.
Doesn't it make a reference to there were other people, like God created other peoples? No, not. No, I was just kidding about that.
Well, go ahead.
Okay.
Back in the day, there wasn't any weirdness. We've made those rules because of our DNA breakdown. So in Kentucky especially,
Is our joke.
you don't marry your sister or your cousin or your second cousin or third cousin because you have this same breakdown of DNA and you're going to have abnormal kids. Does that make sense? Back then, they didn't have that understanding at all. There wasn't a stigma, there wasn't a cultural, oh, you don't marry your sister. We created that to protect our humankind from more dysfunction.
Well, Adam and Eve, their DNA was perfect. There was nothing wrong with them. There were no warts, put it that way. And so, one generation away from Adam and Eve, you're still real close to perfection.
Okay, so that's why they were living on
Super simple.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
That is why.
So there's perfect DNA. There's no sin.
Yeah.
And I mean, compared to today, let's think about how much did Adam and Eve sin compared to how much I do every single day. I mean, they lived in a garden. How much opportunity did they have? so their DNA is perfect, and even, I mean, Adam and Eve essentially were brother and sister too, if you think about it. There were no, I mean, God told them to do that. So, but our DNA is so messed up and so watered down now that when someone marries their sister now, you have the opportunity for really messed up kids. And that's why generations later, I mean, you can read it in the Old Testament where God said, stop doing that. Don't do that anymore. Because God knew that the DNA was getting watered down enough that it was going to be dangerous to continue doing that. So prior to that, I don't have any issue with somebody saying, well, why do you have to do that with his sister? Well, there was nothing wrong. It didn't matter. It was procreation. It wasn't all messed up, weird, like we think it is today. Today we think that's weird and sick and gross because we've had hundreds of years of
But even
that's wrong.
Like, there are other tribes and continents and places, they don't think that's weird at all. That would not be a question for them.
Right.
But for us, it
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with our weird, sexualized, perverted culture. We think it's weird. I mean, there's still people on the earth today that we wouldn't think that was weird at all.
One of the overarching principles that you see that I think is really interesting with people who study evolution and really believe in it is that they believe, obviously built into the framework of evolution, is that things are getting better, that creatures are getting stronger, that you're gaining things as you go. But if you look at all of the records, all of the data that we have as far as people, as far as animals are concerned, everything indicates the opposite is true. All of the evidence shows that people are degrading, that animals are getting worse, weaker, less able to do the things that they had been able to do before.
More susceptible to disease.
More susceptible to diseases, yes. And it's just, so we see that the actual evidence is corroborating what the Bible is saying, or what we would expect from the Bible, the biblical account, is that we started with perfection and we're moving to death, essentially. But the evolution espouses the opposite in the face of all the evidence, opposite to the evidence. So I just think that's an interesting thing. That's something to keep in mind whenever you're talking about the Cain label.
When you close the Cain thing out, they have lots of and lots of sons. God tells us a couple of different places. And they had sons and daughters. And with 900 years to live, he had lots and lots. So you weren't thinking, oh, we're stuck with her. Because my brother already took the other one.
Right.
So, I mean, they could be hundreds of years different in age. Back then, it wouldn't matter. Okay, why aren't we living as long today? One is genetic breakdown. The genetic breakdown is associated with sin breakdown.
Yeah.
Those are interrelated. They can be proven that scientifically with the whole bitterness affects your physical
Stress.
ability to fight things, stress. Even linking into like arthritis. There's, if your grandma has arthritis, doesn't mean she's a bitter old woman.
But it could.
But or there's so.
So, do you think that God designed the universe to be that way, that we are degrading, and that He knew that? Well, I know that He designed it to, but do you know what I'm saying? You think He knew that it would go to the end, and then are we just degrading and degrading until final judgment? Does that make sense?
We're going to evolve back into goo.
From goo to good to goo.
We're going to go all the way back.
I was hoping we'd become an X-Men.
So, what's your question? Someone else?
I think it's just, I think, that God did know that this is how it would play out. But that's why we have a Savior, Jesus, who made all the promises that He made for us, that we can have health, that we can have life more abundant. Because even though the world is falling apart, we don't have to. And that's the glory of salvation, is that we can stay strong and live long because of what He did.
The Bible talks about that Jesus was the Lamb of God slain in the beginning. So he wasn't abandoned.
Right.
Jesus knew that he was going to come
Right.
and die for us before Adam was in. So that was already known, that was already going to happen because he knows that. But his plan, his desire would be, and he established the earth to be able to live forever. The most blessed thing that God did was stop Adam and Eve from eating from the tree that, not tree of knowledge of good and evil, the other tree.
True that.
Tree of life.
Mhm.
Had he not, that would have been really bad. Because now Adam and Eve, let's say they ate from the tree of life, that means they're not going to die. But sin would have grown inside of them, and it would have been horrific. That was a blessing. So even death, in some God awesome way, is a blessing because Paul says, I look forward to it. For me to live as Christ, to die as gain. I'm going to shed this tent. I'm going to spend eternity with him. And there are days when all of us want to shed this tent and just move on to the next spot. But no, in God's pre-fallen, that's where the whole disease and destruction, that's why evolution cannot be linked into Christianity. Because it requires death, disease, suffering, all the things that God's going to abolish. And the new heaven and the new earth will not have this, and it will last forever and ever and ever, which we want to understand. But this earth would have lasted forever and ever and ever, and people forever and ever and ever.
Because you have to remember, his original intent was Eden, was
Yeah,
perfection.
Forever, yeah.
Forever. And so if it had lasted that long without sin, the way he intended, we would all be in very different places today. And my personal theology about salvation is that when you accept Jesus, he starts you on a track to get back to live that way again. And that's passable downable. So,
Right.
yeah, I know, I understand that's not a word.
No.
I have very specific theology about children because I think that I'm on the upslope now. I've gone generations and generations of my DNA breaking down, of my family getting weaker and weaker and weaker as we
Passing down
didn't
the
serve
generational
Jesus.
sins.
And now I'm sinless, and I'm living the way Eden was, the way God meant to me. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying. Isaiah, my son, is going to be better. Pass it down again. So my family line at this point is getting closer to Eden every single time again. And I think that's how God intended it. Instead of death, decay, destruction happened because we were not doing Eden very well. We're not living for Jesus. So I think when you get saved, you get born again, you have a family, you start passing those things down again. You get closer back. That's why I can expect that when the Bible says that I'm not going to be sick, I'm not going to be sick. Because Adam and Jesus didn't have to be sick. Because that's part of salvation. You know.
If death is necessary for evolution to work, then where do people think they go when they die?
There's a lot of different
The goo
Dirt.
floating in space.
Yeah, right.
Nothing.
They really have no argument for that, like they're not scared to die. I mean, I always
Oh, they
have
are.
evidence that people are dying all around them.
And
That's amazing.
My dad
It's
is
in, yeah.
very scared of death. Very scared. He won't get on a plane because of it, ever since 9/11. And that's one of the points I use with him. I have the assurance that if something were to happen to me, I have peace in my heart. And I told him, I want you to have that peace. And, with him, that's where I go, just because I know that's the heart of the issue. It's not evolution. I mean, that may be part of it, but we probably are scared.
I have another silly question.
Okay.
What about dinosaurs and fossils?
Oh,
What
gosh.
are we
That's
told? That's
one of
in
the scriptures
Bible.
that Steve had in there yesterday.
Yeah, there's a good answer.
There's actually, dinosaurs are a lot of times found in you see it. So, but even then, that's true.
On the ark.
What? They were on the ark.
Yeah.
Well, the land going on. Because he didn't bring any seeds on.
Well, those aren't called dinosaurs.
Yeah, that one.
But the average dinosaur was like the size of a chicken. You have to remember that too. There
Yeah.
were very few.
This guy's talking about.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was average. There was much smaller.
What were we talking about before that?
My dad,
Dad scared.
death, where do people go when they die?
Right.
I'm scared.
Yeah. Well, the Bible tells us that death was a victory, death was a sting. So that's a reassurance for us. You know, it wasn't that. Oh, wow. It was a really good.
I'm sure it was really good.
It was a game changer for sure.
Children?
Oh, children, Eden.
The more you look, the harder, you know, just like runs back farther and like,
Don't say anything, I won't come back.
here's another thing as far as dinosaurs, just because you're asking. Even if you don't look at the Bible, which that's my starting point, first and foremost. There's plenty of stuff in there, and it gives descriptions of both. But outside of the Bible, there's Ireland's flag. We didn't find dinosaur bones until 1800s. So before that, the supposed known world, we didn't know about them because supposedly they were dead 250,000 years or when they, so, you know, we had a big long space between dinosaurs and us. The first us, supposedly. You know. And yet, like Ireland, their main flag has been, since pre-1800, has a dinosaur on it. It's a dragon. We call it dragons. We call dinosaurs, they call dragons. Dinosaur just means big lizard. That's what it means. And so, the whole Chinese culture, look how many dragons are all over that culture. And then they said, well, yeah, look at those. Those are so fanciful. There's a fire-breathing, right, yeah, right. And I said, yeah, there's a swimming thing that lights up electricity. Right. Oh, it's a deal. You know what I mean? Where we would think that's crazy. You can't have an animal with electricity in water. It would kill itself. Yeah. Oh no, there's actually lots of them. In different varieties and different kinds and different ways. So it's not so absurd because especially with Chinese culture, they're pretty, it matters to them way more than us of lineage and succession. And so their whole culture is filled with dinosaur drawings. There's also drawings in multiple different pages. There's Nebuchadnezzar, who was in the Bible, but he was the most powerful man on the earth. There's drawing from his not castle kingdom place where there's a drawing of a dinosaur in a cage. If anyone owned one back then, he would.
It would have been him.
Why don't we have them now? Well, why don't we have a lot of extinct animals? Because we like to dominate and kill things. The only reason we don't have as many extinct animals going extinct now is because of all these rules that don't kill them all. Because we realize we're killing them. So we've lost already a lot of animals. And who wouldn't want to say, and there was dragons in our cities, so we need dinosaur, the bigger ones.
Right.
So, or you kill it for protection or for meat. They didn't know that we had an argument here or if they existed or not. They just wanted to eat. So, but they were commonplace. They were. The tough thing, it's really hard because the more you dig in, the more you'll start to realize, I actually own a worldview instead of a biblical view. And it is really hard because it touches on so many different areas, and that's why I was glad that we did this one, because it touches all the way into Jesus. And it can affect how you view the Bible, the promises in the Bible, because you, by accident, it's not like you're bad or evil if you think, well, dinosaurs existed long ago, and it's just you've been brought up since you were 4 with fossils, or super, super old, and the earth was never flooded and all that stuff. But there's so much proof on so many levels.
You don't realize along the way, maybe you did. When I was 4 and I was learning about cavemen discovering fire, I wasn't thinking, well, that's not true.
Right.
Whereas now I think God said, hey guys, hold on a second, I'll be right back, and came back with a torch and showed them, and showed Adam and Eve how to make fire.
Well,
but I didn't think.
Yeah,
I
think he probably knew, and this is the reason. How about if I bring in 12 different people that you don't know, and I say, name them. And then a day later, I say, what did you name these 12 people? You won't have a clue.
Right.
And yet he named all of the animals, not all 32,000 species, but 2,000 kinds. And actually, what he meant, because he didn't name any of the water ones or the sky ones. There's no way that you'd remember that. But his brain was genetically, I mean, how much percent people I know, how much do we use of our actual brain? It's like 50%. It's something
Yeah,
horrible.
something small.
Depends on who you are.
Right.
Yeah, but the smarter one is like 16.5%.
Right.
It really is.
It's crazy.
That much different.
Yeah.
And yet, so they were brilliant. So I don't
Yeah.
think they had to be shown. They didn't have to be shown how to
Yeah.
procreate.
Yeah.
They didn't have to,
Figure that
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
yeah. But we do have a lot of it in our system.
Yeah.
One cool side note that somebody explained to me, a biology guy explained to me, is they actually have ants. I can't remember where they are or exactly what the name is, but they're like this type of fire ant.
Oh, yeah.
And in their abdomen, they have two different receptacles. They have tanks that are filled with
Bombardier beetle.
chemicals. Yeah, that's what. Yeah,
Bombardier beetle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they have
fire.
and yeah, and they have two different sprayers on the side, and they spray whenever they're in trouble. And when these chemicals meet, when they touch, it causes an explosion. It causes literal fire.
Yeah.
It's a combustion reaction.
Not only
dragon
that,
beetle.
not only that, but it shoots it out at such a it shoots it at a burst, so it doesn't blow it away. So
Yeah.
it's like extremely precise.
But I mean, a dragon breathing fire is totally plausible.
Well, and how would that beetle evolve?
He's right. It would
Did
blow
the bird
itself
one
up.
go, we're done. That's stop.
It's over. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And there's no evolution goal. Remember, there's two things:
Yeah.
increase in information and goals. Evolution is goals.
Yeah.
If we were building a beetle, then we're like, okay, well maybe we need to push it out farther. Tanks might be a good idea. You know?
Yeah.
Here's one more thing, and then I need you guys to do a quick survey. It's like a 2-question here, but it's on our smartphones on salttoday.org and the breakouts. So I just thought it would be fun. I brought a bunch of these, but this frog is called a frogsicle. And if you drop this frog, I'll show you. This frogsicle will go thump if dropped. 2/3 of the frog's body water is frozen. The biochemistry of its body fluids is by ordinary standards quite out of whack. Its organs are dehydrated, it's not breathing, and its heart is not beating. Yet it will be ready to mate within 2 days of the February fall. Read more about the Alaskan wood frog's icy response to the cold in this new sciencemag.org. The secret lives of frozen frogs. So cool. Read that, you think, God, you're amazing.
Yeah.
You froze a stinking frog. Every winter, this frog freezes, and there's a picture of it. The body is frozen. It'll go boom. But in February, it comes back to life and it's ready to
It's
procreate
cryogenics.
to mate.
It's cryogenics. We've been wanting to do this for decades.
Yeah. And that's what Wade thinks for closing this up for me. Way in the beginning, I said that we think we're all that, and we still can't do even a quarter or an eighth of what God does. We even watch it, we even can study it, we dissect these things, believe them, but we still can't replicate it. So, and if we have intelligence and we're goal-oriented, and we can even introduce new information, and we can't do it. We can't make things. We can't do cryogenics. We can't. What in the world is evolution about? There's no way, because if that new information is not going us. And reading about this gives me, Lord, you're so, he's funny. Just it develops more of your relationship with him, in a variety of ways. Because you realize he's funny, he's brilliant, he's creative, all that stuff. So there are other things. I hope that your hunger is increasing and you're not at all fearful in asking and looking up stuff and researching things, because the answers are out there. God's word. Remember we showed the serious Jesus that he's not joking. Looks like we gotta get to see that. Okay. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. I'm serious, I'm not joking. That's him. He's serious Jesus. So that's us too. He wants us to believe every verse in his word. I'll stand on it. I'll go to the grave on it. All the way. So let's pray. And then if you would, if you go to the salttoday.org/breakouts, or, it's real simple. Actually, I'm really impressed with our
Mobile site?
Mobile site. It's
Yeah.
really, really convenient. If you haven't used it, then you can miss out. But there's a breakouts thing, and it's like a 2-question quiz or 2 survey. God, I do thank you so much for opening up our schedules to be able to come today. And Lord, I do pray that I did this topic justice, and that your word and just the value of your word would just be obvious and would penetrate all of our hearts. God, I thank you that there aren't any holes to your word, that no one's going to trip over, oh, this was never discovered these last 2,000 years that the word's been written. Lord, we thank you that your word will stand forever. We praise you for it. God, I pray that it would stand forever in our hearts. No matter what these students run into in class, that God, that their base point is your word. And that from there, they can just give you glory and honor and praise as they discover the frog signal or whatever. We praise you in the name of Jesus. I pray that you give them strength and courage, not just to believe in your word, but to believe in your salvation. And that they would use that to witness, to tell other people about the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Believe in that power. We praise you in the name of Jesus. Amen.